Hello and welcome to part 3 of the Blazor blog series, and today we will implement the web API. So enough with the client for now. We will go to the server project next, and similar to the weather forecast controller right here, we will create another controller just for the blog posts, because I think it's not that nice that we store the posts in the blog service on the client here. The goal is eventually adding a database with entity framework. I think this will be done in the next part, or if we still have time, we do this in this part. But the main goal here in this part now is adding a web API controller and then storing the blog posts in a database and not adding them manually with code in the blog service. But in the controller now, just for the purpose of learning, we will move these posts here to the controller and get them from the controller, and then later again adding the posts in a database, in a SQLite database, and accessing them with entity framework. Okay, so long story short, let's just do this. In the server project, we've got our controllers folder here, and we right click and add another controller, not a Razor component, not a class or anything, just here on top we add controller, and then we choose API controller empty. Maybe just to mention what are the other options here. Well, this one I think already explains itself. Here we use entity framework, but still when we're using entity framework, we will add or use an empty controller, or just modify the controller we will add now. But in here you automatically get actions that use entity framework already, and here you've got some methods already for all the CRUD operations, meaning create, read, update, and delete. And here we will then use the HTTP methods, get, post, put, and delete, but you will learn all this along the way. And I think the best way to learn this right now is to use an empty API controller. And since we are not building a MVC application, we use the MVC pattern in essence, so model view controller pattern, but we don't build an MVC application, so we don't need the MVC controller here, because I think in this case we would also have view support, the MVC view support. That's totally different stuff. But here we want to add a web API controller, an empty one with no methods at all, and we call this thing the blog controller. Hit return, and here it is, our blog controller. And you can already see, again, similar to the weather forecast controller, we've got some attributes here. We've got the API controller attribute, and when you hover over it, you see it indicates that the type and all derived types are used to serve HTTP API responses. So here we can make web service calls with this thing. And then we've got a route, very important. We've got the route so that we know which URL we have to use to access this controller. And I think it's funny that here, by default, the route is just controller, the convention controller, so we have to use the name weather forecast. And here Visual Studio adds API, whatever. So you can use API, you can remove API, it's totally up to you. But again, we have the controller convention here. So the URL to get to this controller would be API and then blog. Okay, and the next thing is we want to get some blog posts from this controller. And since I'm really lazy, I just copy these ones here and remove them. So we will get some errors here, of course, and we will fix this in a second. But now we've got our blog posts in the blog controller. We add the using directive Blazor blog shared so that we get the class here. And let's just add a little text so we will really see that these blog posts are coming from the server now. Okay, and now we can actually already add some methods, and the first one would be public. And now what I do, I want to return an action result of type, well, let's get all the blog posts, so of type list blog post, and we just call this thing get. And by convention, the Web API already knows when you call this method get that you would also want to use the HTTP method get, but you can also add an attribute called HTTP get, and then you are definitely sure that you have to use the get HTTP method to call this function here. And in this case, you could also say, give me all the blog posts, for instance. I think this is a nice name, so maybe just use this name here. And then what we can do is we just return not the blog posts, we want to return an action result. If I now say return posts, this wouldn't work, I guess. Okay, oh yeah, it does work, because in this case we would get a 200 return type. So the same if you would say okay posts. So by default we return a 200 and HTTP in status code 200 okay. You can see it here, status codes status 200 okay response, and the same would happen in fact when we would just return the posts. And that's everything we have to do. This is our method, if I did not forget anything. And with that we get all the blog posts, and let's just add the other method to return a single blog post, and this one would be public action result blog post, a single one. Give me that single blog post, and in this case it's similar to the method here in the blog service, first or default, but what I want to do is I want to get the first or default one, and if it is null, we return a 404 not found. So you see, this is why it makes sense to return an action result with certain status codes, because then you can react to them on the client. Maybe if you get a 404, you can really, I don't know, open a notification, a toaster message, anything like that, that says, hey, this blog post does not exist. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Again, totally up to you. I think the names are nice. And for this, we say var post equals, and then of course we have to add an argument here, the URL. And this would be posts, first or default again, where not the predicate, where P for post is the URL, to lower again, equals the given URL to lower, like that. And now if the post is null, for instance, we can say return not found, and we can also add a message to that, like this post does not exist. Okay, but if it does exist, we return okay post, like that. And one last thing is missing here. We add an attribute. Again, it's an HTTP get, and this time we also add a route. So we could do something like that, actually, HTTP get and then route, and then in the brackets we add the route. Or if you're lazy like me, you just combine these attributes, open the brackets here, and then say in curly braces then URL, because these braces here, tell the controller that this is an argument and this name has to match the argument of this method here. Alright, I think that's it for the controller already. So we've got the posts now here in the controller, the mock posts. And again, later we will add them to the SQLite database and use Entity Framework to receive them. And in this case, we have to modify the bodies of the methods, of course. But first, the first method here that receives all the blog posts, give me all the blog posts here, which could also be called get again, just returns all the posts and with the status code 200. And here the other method to get a single post, give me that single blog post. You could also call this method get because it would have an argument, so it's different from the other method then. But I think this is also a nice name. But seriously, in a real world project, maybe you might not use this name. You really don't want to use this because in the next code review, well, maybe someone is telling you to not do this. But anyways, we add this argument here, URL, and then with the help of this URL, we try to get the first or default post of all our mock posts here. If this post does not exist, we return this post does not exist with the 404 not found status code. But if it does exist, we return a 200 OK with the post. Okay, so far the controller. And then we go back to the client where we already see some problems, of course. Now these are easy. This is just the posts, but we have to change a bit more than just that. The first thing is we need a constructor to inject the HTTP client here. So again, we're using dependency injection, but not in a Razor component. This time we're using this service to inject something. But first the constructor, you can just add CTOR, hit tab twice, and then we've got our constructor. And now, as an argument, we add the HTTP client, call this thing HTTP, and with control period, I want to create and assign the field HTTP, and add this underscore down here. Beautiful. And now the next thing already is to access the controller, so to make a web service call. And this thing will be asynchronous, so you will see that there will appear some more errors. But anyways, let's just do this. So the very first thing would be to get the post. So var post, this is the single one here, is HTTP, and then we get some suggestions here, but what I want to use is get from JSON async, and we know that we get a blog post, so we can tell that the function, and then we add the URL, which is API blog, and then the URL. So let's just use, or let's just add the URL here like that, and that would be our posts. And then we return the posts. Problem here is that it says, hey, this method here returns a task blog post, and this one here is returning just a blog post. So this is not really working. So we have to make this an asynchronous method. So we add the task return type. This could be it, but in this case, this would still be called synchronous. So to make this asynchronous, we add the async keyword and then also await this call, and that's it. So we've got an asynchronous method now, and we also have to change that in the interface, because otherwise the interface is telling us that we're not implementing all the methods it wants us to implement. But still, we get these this single blog post here now from the controller, and it's quite similar in the other case where we just want to get all the blog posts. So we add the async task and we return awaited HTTP get from JSON async, which would now be a list of blog posts, and the URL is API blog, like that. Okay, and now in the interface we just add the task return type, and then the interface should be happy again. Okay, and this should be it. So we've got our controller. We fixed the service now with a constructor, injected the HTTP client and changed these two methods here. And now we have to modify our Razor components. So the first one would be the blog posts Razor, this one here. And yeah, this was what I was expecting, or that's what I was expecting, that we get an error here telling us again cannot convert the types, task to not type, task type to not task type. So again, we have to make this asynchronous, and thanks to .NET, we've got an async variation, I think. Async task, yep, that's it. And here we just await this call. So we've got an uninitialized async as well. We have to add the async keyword and the task return type, and then we await the get blog posts call here. And in that case, we get the posts really from the controller. And in the post Razor, it's quite similar. We add async task on initialized async, and I don't know, I think I did not mention that the last time, that these, or this call on initialized or on initialized async, this is part of the Razor component life cycle. So it's a method you can override, and that is called every time the component renders for the first time, or when it starts rendering. So really on initialization, this method is called, and in this case we call this method here. And I think that we will get an error. This is not enough, but let's just try this out. So we've got the controller, we've got the services or the service, and we've got the Razor components. Blog posts receives all the blog posts on initialization, and we've got the post Razor here that receives a single one. Okay, and let's have a look in the package manager console. The app has been restarted. Let's have a look in Chrome. Already rebuilt itself and reloaded, and we see that we get the calls with Web API. Beautiful. Let's reload again to really see this. Great. Okay, so here are the posts, and here we also see the actual call. So we've got this URL here, API blog. The base URL is actually the same as the one of the actual page here, of the actual web application. So localhost 5001 in the HTTPS case. In the other case, it would be just localhost 5000, and then API block. You see that a 200 OK is returned as status code. We don't have a request object in this case, and in the preview we see that here are all our blog posts, and we see them right here. And now let's just clear this, and when we click on read more, we get an error. That was what that's what I was expecting actually. And this does also not really work. Okay, we get a 200, okay, but something is fishy here. But I know what is wrong, and this is the current post. So we could fix this, I guess, when we just initialize the current post here, but maybe we can also add an if condition here. So if the current post is null, we can add something like a little span saying loading or getting that blog post from the service. And in the else case, so if the current post is not null, we actually display it. And let's save this and see if this is working now. Okay, I think it was reloading. Not sure about that. Oh, let's just display the home page. Maybe doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't want to reload. Post is not working. Home is also not working. Okay, then we have to do it the hard way. We stop the app and it still tries to reload. Okay, now we stopped it. Let's start it again. So the application really did not like this. Okay, now it started, it is loading, and we get the home page. Beautiful. Now let's open the console and let's try to receive a single post, and now this is working. And if you pay attention, you should see for a fraction of a second that there is some kind of a loading screen, but we can of course change the speed to fast 3G. And if you now reload the page, you see the loading screen here. You see that it takes some time to get all the blog posts. And now if I click read more, you see getting that blog post and so on. And there it is, new tutorial, and we get the actual blog post. And what happens now if I try it this way? We get a 404. So getting that blog post from the service stands there forever, but the response is here, the status code 400. Do we also get the message? Not really. Preview response, no, that's not working as expected, but we get the 404. Okay. Fine with me. For that part, yeah, what we could do now is of course change this. Maybe if we get a 404, then react to that. But I guess this should be it. New tutorial is working. We get the blog post and we can switch that back to online. Reload it now. Yeah, that's faster now, and the same works for this thing here. Okay, so in essence, not really much when you watch at the application, but again, under the hood, we did a lot. We added the controller. We are now getting the posts from the web service or from the web API. And I would say I'll commit this now with using web API to get the blog posts. Commit all. Push this to GitHub, and now this is also available on GitHub. You get the link in the description below. I hope you liked this video. If you want to dive a bit deeper or you can't wait for the next part, have a look at the Blazor WebAssembly Full Stack Bootcamp. You can see the link in the description where you build an online browser game with Blazor WebAssembly, Web API, Entity Framework, SQLite, JSON Web Tokens for authentication, and so on. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, please click the like button or even subscribe. It really does make a difference. Again, thank you very much, and I see you next time.